I watched my father's face drain of color as his Black American Express card was declined for the third time at the Riverside Country Club bar. 20 minutes earlier, he had announced to 300 wedding guests that I was no longer really family after my public disagreement with his treatment of our household staff. Now, as the bartender awkwardly suggested he try a different payment method, I felt the same ice-cold satisfaction I imagine a chess master feels when delivering checkmate. The look of confusion and growing panic in his eyes was absolutely priceless, as he frantically pulled out card after card, each one meeting the same fate. What he didn't know yet was that I had just frozen every single account, credit line, and financial instrument the Chen family had access to. And this was only the beginning of his very expensive education about who actually controlled the family's $15 million empire. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of my brother Danny's wedding dawned crisp and clear in Walnut Creek, California. The kind of perfect October day that made the rolling hills look like a postcard. I stood at the window of my childhood bedroom, now converted into what my mother generously called a guest suite, watching the catering trucks arrive at our family estate below. The irony wasn't lost on me that after building my own successful financial advisory practice and helping manage the family's wealth, for the past 5 years, I was still relegated to sleeping in what used to be my teenage sanctuary whenever I visited home. My name is Emma Chen, and at 28, I had already built Pacific Wealth Management into one of the most respected boutique financial firms in the Bay Area. My clients trusted me with portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and I had earned that trust through careful analysis, strategic planning, and an almost intuitive understanding of market dynamics that had served me well since graduating with my MBA from Berkeley's Haas School of Business. What most people didn't realize, including my own family, was that the skills I used to grow my clients' wealth had been quietly applied to something much closer to home. The Chen family fortune, built over 25 years through Chen and Rodriguez, construction had grown from a small residential contractor into a major commercial development company. My father, Robert Chen, or Bob as he preferred in business circles, had always been proud of his immigrant success story. He loved to tell anyone who would listen how he had arrived from Taiwan with nothing but ambition and had built an empire through hard work and smart partnerships with Frank Rodriguez, a second-generation Mexican-American contractor who brought established relationships and local knowledge to their venture. What my father never mentioned in these stories was how the company had nearly collapsed during the 2008 financial crisis, saved only by strategic financial restructuring that I had quietly orchestrated during my senior year at Berkeley. He had suffered a minor heart attack from the stress, and in his vulnerable state, had signed over broad financial power of attorney to me, trusting his economics major daughter to help navigate the crisis while he focused on his health. The company survived, thrived, and expanded, but those legal documents had never been revoked. In the years since, I had used that authority to systematically organize, optimize, and ultimately control virtually every aspect of the Chen family's financial life. The construction company generated approximately $4 million annually in profit, but the real wealth had accumulated through careful investment and real estate acquisition. The family's portfolio included commercial properties across Northern California, diversified stock holdings, municipal bonds, and strategic investments in emerging construction technologies. I had structured everything through a complex web of trusts, LLCs, and investment accounts that maximize tax efficiency while maintaining liquidity. My father understood the broad strokes of our financial position, but the intricate details of how money flowed between accounts, how credit lines were secured, and how investment decisions were implemented had long since become my exclusive domain. This arrangement had worked smoothly for years, largely because my father trusted my financial judgment and appreciated the results. Our family's net worth had grown from roughly $4 million to over $15 million during my stewardship, even. as we maintained a comfortable lifestyle and supported various charitable causes. The only friction came from his increasingly traditional expectations about family roles and his growing frustration with what he saw as my stubborn independence. Marcus, my husband of 3 years, understood these family dynamics better than anyone. A software engineer at a sustainable energy startup, he had grown up in a progressive household where intellectual contributions were valued regardless of gender. He often served as a buffer between my father's old-world expectations and my refusal to diminish myself to accommodate them. This morning, as I prepared for Danny's wedding, Marcus was already downstairs helping with setup while trying to keep peace between various family factions. My brother Danny had always occupied a different position in the family hierarchy. 2 years younger than me, he had joined Chen and Rodriguez immediately after college, working his way up from job site supervisor to project manager to his current role as vice president of operations. Unlike me, Danny had never challenged our father's authority or questioned established family patterns. He was competent at his job, well-liked by employees, and generally content to follow rather than lead. His upcoming marriage to Ashley Martinez had been a source of great pride for our parents, particularly since the Martinez family owned successful real estate development companies that represented potential business synergies. Ashley herself was pleasant enough, though she came from a level of privilege that made even our comfortable lifestyle seem modest. The Martinez family compound in Atherton featured prominently in lifestyle magazines, and their social connections included tech, executives, politicians, and entertainment industry figures. My parents, especially my mother Linda, had been thoroughly charmed by Ashley's grace and her family's evident wealth. The wedding they had planned was intended to cement not just a romantic union, but a strategic alliance between two successful immigrant families. The tension that would eventually explode at the reception had been building for months, centered around a seemingly minor issue that had grown into a major philosophical divide. Our family employed 3 full-time household staff members: Rosa Martinez, no relation to Ashley, who had managed our home for 15 years, her daughter Carmen, who handled catering and events, and James Wilson, who maintained our grounds and provided security. These weren't just employees to me. They were people who had become extended family, who had celebrated our successes and supported us through difficulties. The conflict began when my father decided that Ashley's family might view our staff arrangements as insufficiently formal for the social circles they traveled in. He had insisted on hiring additional temporary staff for the wedding through an expensive agency, relegating Rosa and Carmen to behind-the-scenes roles despite their expertise and years of experience, managing large events at our home. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When I learned that he had also instructed them to park off-property during the reception to avoid any suggestion that they lived on site, I had intervened directly. The conversation had escalated into a broader argument about respect, family, values, and what my father called my inappropriate attachment to the help. His language had become increasingly dismissive of both the staff and my judgment, culminating in his declaration that I was too emotional and idealistic to understand business necessities. When I pointed out that Rosa had essentially raised Danny and me while our parents built their business, and that treating her with such disrespect was unconscionable, he had accused me of being influenced by liberal nonsense from my education and urban lifestyle. The breaking point came during the rehearsal dinner at the country club 2 nights before the wedding. Ashley's parents had made several comments about maintaining appropriate boundaries with service personnel, clearly parroting conversations they had had with my father. When Danny remained silent during these discussions, failing to defend people who had cared for him his entire life, I realized that my father's attitudes were not only entrenched, but spreading to the next generation. I had tried one final private conversation with my father that morning, hoping to find some compromise that would allow Rosa and Carmen to participate fully in the celebration. Instead, he had become increasingly irritated with what he saw as my persistent defiance of his authority. The conversation ended with him stating flatly that if I couldn't support his decisions as head of the family, perhaps I should reconsider whether I belonged at the wedding at all. That conversation had crystallized something that had been building in my mind for months. My father's increasing authoritarianism wasn't limited to household staff. He had been systematically dismissing my input on business decisions despite my demonstrated expertise. He had begun making comments about how my success had gone to my head and how marriage should have settled me down into a more supportive role. Most troubling, he had started suggesting that my position managing the family's finances should transition to Danny as he prepared to take over more business responsibilities. As I watched the final preparations for the reception through my bedroom window, I reflected on how my father's attitudes had evolved over the years. The man who had once been proud of my academic achievements and professional success had gradually become threatened by them. The daughter he had trusted to save the family business during its darkest hour was now viewed as a challenge to his authority rather than a valuable contributor to its continued success. The irony was devastating. My father had built his identity around being a successful patriarch who provided for and protected his family. What he failed to recognize was that his family's financial security now depended entirely on systems and relationships I had created and maintained. The construction company generated steady revenue, but the investment portfolio I managed provided the real wealth that funded our lifestyle, supported the business during lean periods, and would eventually provide for my parents' retirement. Every major financial decision over the past 5 years had flowed through accounts I controlled, credit lines I had established, and investment strategies I had developed. My father signed documents I prepared, approved transactions I recommended, and celebrated growth I had orchestrated. He maintained the illusion of control while I wielded the actual power, an arrangement that had worked because I had never challenged his authority directly. But as I prepared to join the wedding festivities, I was beginning to understand that this careful balance was no longer sustainable. My father's increasing need to assert dominance was bumping up against my growing unwillingness to be diminished. The household staff situation had become symbolic of a much larger conflict about respect, authority, and the fundamental question of who actually controlled the Chen family's destiny. The wedding reception would take place in the grand ballroom of the Riverside Country Club, with its soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and panoramic views of the surrounding hills. 300 guests would celebrate Danny and Ashley's union while enjoying a menu curated by the club's award-winning chef and entertainment provided by a 12-piece orchestra. The event was designed to project success, sophistication, and social standing, everything my father valued most about the life he had built in America. What he didn't yet realize was that every element of this celebration, from the venue deposit to the catering costs to the photographer's fees, was funded through accounts I managed and controlled. The Black American Express card in his wallet carried my signature as the authorized account manager. The business credit lines that supported Chen and Rodriguez operations required my approval for major expenditures. Even the family's personal checking accounts had been restructured years earlier to optimize cash flow, with automatic transfers I had programmed to ensure sufficient liquidity for operations while maximizing investment returns. My father lived comfortably within a financial ecosystem I had designed, maintained, and controlled, but he remained largely ignorant of its inner workings. He saw money flowing smoothly to support business operations and family expenses, but he didn't understand the complex choreography required to make that happen. Today, he was about to receive a very expensive education about the difference between the appearance of control and its reality. As I finished getting ready for the ceremony, I reflected on the path that had brought me to this moment. Years of being underestimated had taught me to work quietly and methodically, building power while allowing others to maintain their illusions of authority. I had learned to navigate family dynamics with the same strategic thinking I applied to investment, portfolios, always planning several moves ahead while maintaining flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances. The young woman who had saved the family business during the financial crisis had evolved into a sophisticated financial strategist capable of complex corporate maneuvering. But more importantly, she had developed the confidence to use that expertise, when necessary, to protect what mattered most. Today, protecting the dignity of people who had served our family faithfully for years was going to require demonstrating just how much power I had quietly accumulated while everyone else was focused on maintaining appearances. My phone buzzed with a text from Grace Kim, my former boss and current mentor, who had built her own investment firm after leaving Goldman Sachs. Heard through the grapevine that today might be eventful. Remember what I always told you about: the difference between authority and power. Some people have titles, others control the money. Good luck. Her message reminded me that I wasn't alone in understanding these dynamics. The professional network I had built over the years included other women who had learned to navigate family and business situations where traditional authority structures conflicted with actual competence and control. Their support and advice had been invaluable as I developed both my business and my approach to managing complex personal relationships. As I headed downstairs to join the pre-ceremony preparations, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman reflected there bore little resemblance to the uncertain college student who had first taken on responsibility for the family's finances during that long-ago crisis. This woman wore her success confidently, dressed in an elegant burgundy dress that projected both sophistication and strength. She had built something valuable through her own efforts and expertise, and she was prepared to defend it when necessary. The morning sun streamed through the windows of our family home, illuminating photographs that chronicled generations of Chen family milestones. My grandparents' immigration story, my parents' wedding, Danny's and my graduations, business achievements, and family celebrations created a visual narrative of American success. What those photographs couldn't capture was the evolution of power and authority within our family, the gradual shift from traditional patriarchal control to a more complex reality where competence and strategic thinking determined who actually shaped our collective destiny. Today would mark a turning point in that narrative, the day when illusions about authority would collide with the reality of financial control. The wedding celebration that was meant to demonstrate my father's success and social standing would instead become an expensive lesson about the difference between commanding respect and earning it, between demanding loyalty and inspiring it. As I prepared to join my family for what would prove to be an unforgettable celebration, I carried with me the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly where you stand and precisely what tools you have available when the time comes to use them. The day ahead would test everything I had learned about family dynamics, financial strategy, and the sometimes brutal necessity of standing up for your principles, regardless of the personal cost. St. Michael's Church had been the spiritual home of the Chen family for over 2 decades, its Gothic Revival architecture providing a suitably grand backdrop for what my father considered the social event of the year. The sanctuary could accommodate 400 guests, though we had limited the ceremony to 300 to maintain an air of exclusivity that would impress the Martinez family and their influential social circle. Enormous arrangements of white, orchids and blush roses lined the center aisle, their cost equivalent to what Rosa made in 3 months, though I was apparently the only family member troubled by that calculation. The morning ceremony proceeded with military precision, orchestrated by Amanda Sterling, the wedding planner my mother had hired at Ashley's suggestion. Amanda came with impeccable credentials, having coordinated celebrations for tech executives, venture capitalists, and old California money families who valued both elegance and discretion. Her team had transformed the church into something that looked more like a society magazine spread than a place of worship, complete with professional photographers capturing every moment for what Ashley called their legacy documentation. I sat in the second pew with Marcus, watching my brother Danny fidget nervously at the altar, while Father Michael delivered opening remarks about the sanctity of marriage and the importance of family unity. The irony of that particular theme wasn't lost on me, given the tensions that had been simmering beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect family celebration. Marcus squeezed my hand reassuringly, a silent acknowledgement that he could sense my growing unease with the elaborate performance surrounding us. The church was filled with representatives from every important family in our social and business circles. Chen and Rodriguez employees occupied several rows, their presence both a gesture of respect for Danny and a subtle display of the company's success and employee loyalty. My father had specifically requested that all department heads attend, understanding that weddings provided valuable networking opportunities and demonstrated the company's commitment to family values that resonated with potential clients. Ashley's side of the church showcased an entirely different level of social prominence. The Martinez family had connections throughout California's political and business establishment, relationships that had been carefully cultivated over 3 generations of successful real estate development. Their guests included a congressman, 2 state senators, several Silicon Valley executives, and at least 1 Hollywood producer, whose name I recognized from entertainment news. The contrast between our solid upper-middle-class respectability and their genuine wealth and influence was subtle but unmistakable. Patricia Martinez, Ashley's mother, had positioned herself as the unofficial social coordinator for their side of the family, ensuring that introductions were made and connections established throughout the morning's festivities. She moved through the church with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to high-stakes social navigation, her designer suit and understated jewelry projecting exactly the right level of sophistication and success. My mother, despite her own considerable social skills, seemed slightly overwhelmed by Patricia's effortless command of the environment. The ceremony itself unfolded according to traditional Catholic liturgy, with personal touches that reflected both families' values and aspirations. Danny had written his own vows, speaking earnestly about partnership, respect, and building a life together that honored both their individual dreams and their shared commitment to family. Ashley's vows emphasized gratitude for finding someone who understood her ambitions while providing the stability she needed to pursue them. Both spoke beautifully, and I found myself genuinely moved by their obvious affection for each other, despite my growing concerns about the family dynamics surrounding their union. Father Michael's homily focused on the theme of 2 families becoming one, emphasizing how marriage created new bonds of loyalty and responsibility that extended beyond the couple themselves. He spoke eloquently about the immigrant experience, acknowledging how both the Chen and Martinez families had built success through hard work, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment to providing opportunities for future generations. The message resonated deeply with many guests, particularly the older generation who had lived through their own struggles to establish themselves in American society. What struck me most powerfully during the ceremony was the careful choreography of respect and hierarchy that governed every interaction. Ashley's father, William Martinez, occupied a position of subtle but undeniable social dominance, his presence commanding deference from other guests despite his understated demeanor. My father, while clearly successful and respected in his own right, seemed to recognize that he was operating in a different league of influence and connections. The dynamic between them was cordial, but carried undertones of evaluation and positioning. That spoke to larger questions about family status and social standing. The professional photography team moved discreetly throughout the ceremony, capturing not just the obvious moments, but the subtle interactions that revealed family relationships and social dynamics. I noticed one photographer specifically focusing on guest reactions, documenting who spoke with whom and how various family members positioned themselves relative to each other. These images would become part of the permanent record of not just Danny and Ashley's wedding, but the broader social connections and family alliances represented in the gathering. During the exchange of rings, I found myself studying the faces of our household staff, who had been permitted to attend the ceremony, though they would be working during the reception. Rosa sat near the back of the church, her expression radiating, genuine joy for Danny's happiness despite the recent tensions about her role in the day's events. Carmen, Rosa's daughter, had brought her own children, who gazed wide-eyed at the elaborate decorations and formal proceedings. James Wilson, our groundskeeper and security coordinator, maintained his characteristic watchful presence, simultaneously attending the ceremony and monitoring for any potential issues. The presence of our staff at the ceremony highlighted the complex class dynamics that would become more pronounced during the reception. Here in the church, they were welcomed as family friends celebrating an important milestone. Later at the country club, they would be relegated to service roles, their long-standing relationships with our family subordinated to the social expectations of our more prominent guests. The transition from spiritual celebration to social performance would require them to literally change positions, from honored attendees to invisible support staff. Marcus leaned over during the lighting of the unity candle to whisper his observation that Ashley's family seemed to treat weddings like corporate merger announcements. His comment made me smile despite my growing unease, reminding me that I wasn't alone in noticing the calculated nature of many interactions throughout the morning. His irreverent humor had always helped me maintain perspective during family events that threatened to become overwhelmingly formal or politically charged. The recessional began with Danny and Ashley practically glowing with happiness as they made their way down the aisle, followed by their wedding party and immediate family members. The joy on their faces was genuine and infectious, temporarily overwhelming my concerns about family politics and social positioning. Whatever complications surrounded their union, their love for each other was clearly authentic and deep. As we filed out of the church behind them, I reminded myself that their happiness was the real purpose of the day's celebration, regardless of the other agendas being pursued by various family members. The receiving line outside the church provided my first real opportunity to observe how our two families interacted when not constrained by formal ceremony. Patricia Martinez had clearly prepared her side for strategic networking, introducing her guests to Key Chen and Rodriguez personnel and local business leaders who might prove valuable for future projects. My father reciprocated by ensuring that our most successful clients and business partners were introduced to Martinez family members, particularly those involved in real estate development and construction. Frank Rodriguez, my father's longtime business partner, seemed particularly energized by the networking opportunities, having identified several potential clients among Ashley's extended family. His enthusiasm was infectious, and I watched him work the crowd with genuine skill, building rapport and identifying mutual interests that could lead to future business relationships. The construction industry in Northern California was competitive, enough that any expansion of their professional network represented significant value. What troubled me was observing how these business calculations seemed to overshadow the personal celebration for many attendees. Conversations that should have focused on Danny and Ashley's happiness repeatedly shifted to discussions of market opportunities, regulatory changes affecting the construction industry, and potential collaborations between various represented companies. The wedding was becoming a sophisticated business development event, disguised as a family celebration. The transition from church to country club provided a natural intermission that allowed family dynamics to shift and realign as we prepared for the more elaborate reception festivities. The Riverside Country Club had been selected not just for its elegant facilities, but for its prestigious reputation and carefully curated membership, factors that mattered enormously to both families as they sought to project success and social standing to their assembled guests. I rode to the club with Marcus and my parents, an arrangement that put me in the uncomfortable position of listening to my father's running commentary on the morning's proceedings and his expectations for the afternoon's networking opportunities. His satisfaction with how the ceremony had unfolded was evident, though his focus seemed less on Danny's happiness and more on the favorable impressions made on the Martinez family and their influential guests. My mother contributed occasional observations about specific attendees and their social connections, demonstrating her own sophisticated understanding of the complex web of relationships represented in the wedding gathering. The country club's imposing entrance, with its circular drive lined with mature oak trees and perfectly manicured landscaping, created an immediate impression of established wealth and exclusivity. The building itself reflected early 20th century California architecture, with Spanish Revival elements that projected both elegance and permanence. Valet attendants in crisp uniforms efficiently managed the arrival of guests, many driving luxury vehicles that served as additional markers of social and economic status. Linda Chen, my mother, had spent months coordinating with the club's event staff to ensure that every detail of the reception would meet the expectations of our distinguished guests. Her background as a former marketing executive had proven invaluable in understanding how to craft an experience that would impress Ashley's sophisticated family, while showcasing our own success and hospitality. The result was a celebration that balanced traditional elegance with contemporary luxury, designed to appeal to multiple generations and diverse cultural backgrounds. The cocktail hour was scheduled to take place on the club's terraced gardens, which offered spectacular views of the surrounding hills and valley. Professional bartenders had been positioned at multiple stations, serving premium spirits and signature cocktails that had been specially created for the occasion. The catering team, led by the club's executive chef, had prepared an elaborate array of hors d'oeuvres that reflected both families' cultural heritage while maintaining the sophisticated presentation expected by the venue's discerning clientele. Ashley's college roommate and maid of honor, Jennifer Walsh, had arrived from New York specifically for the wedding, bringing with her the urban sophistication and professional accomplishments that characterized many of Ashley's social circle. Jennifer worked in investment banking and carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to high-stakes business environments. Her presence added another layer of professional credibility to the gathering, particularly for guests involved in finance and real estate development. The groomsmen, led by Tyler Brooks, Danny's best friend since high school, represented a more grounded perspective on the day's proceedings. Tyler had grown up in our neighborhood and understood the Chen family dynamics with an intimacy that allowed him to navigate potentially sensitive situations with humor and diplomacy. His easy rapport with both Danny and my father had made him invaluable during the wedding planning process, particularly when tensions arose about various aspects of the celebration. Grace Kim arrived during the cocktail hour, having driven down from San Francisco specifically to attend the reception. Her presence meant everything to me, representing not just personal support, but professional validation of my capabilities and judgment. As someone who had built her own successful investment firm after leaving a prestigious Wall Street position, Grace understood the complexities of managing family expectations while pursuing independent career goals. Her attendance also sent a subtle message about my own professional connections and standing within the Bay Area financial community. The Martinez family's social circle included several individuals whose presence significantly elevated the gathering's profile and networking potential. Congressman David Liu, a longtime family friend, had adjusted his schedule to attend the reception, bringing with him the political connections and influence that could prove valuable for both construction and real estate development projects. His wife, Sarah Liu, served on the boards of several prominent charitable organizations, adding another dimension of social influence to the gathering. Patricia Martinez had strategically positioned herself to facilitate introductions between her guests and our family's business associates, demonstrating sophisticated understanding of how social events could advance professional relationships. Her conversations with my father revealed careful preparation, as she had clearly researched Chen and Rodriguez's project history and market position before the wedding. This level of preparation impressed my father enormously, reinforcing his perception that the Martinez family operated at a level of sophistication that could significantly benefit our business interests. William Martinez, Ashley's father, commanded respect through his understated but unmistakable authority and accomplishment. His real estate development firm had been responsible for several landmark projects throughout California, and his reputation for successful public-private partnerships had made him a sought-after collaborator for major infrastructure projects. His presence at the wedding represented an implicit endorsement of our family's standing and potential for future collaboration. The contrast between our family's approaches to wealth and influence became more apparent as the cocktail hour progressed. The Chen family's success was relatively recent and remained closely tied to active business operations, requiring continuous effort and attention to maintain and grow. The Martinez family's wealth was more established and diversified, providing them with greater flexibility and social leverage. This difference in financial maturity translated into distinct approaches to social interaction and business development. Danny moved through the crowd with obvious happiness, introducing Ashley to family friends and business associates who had known him since childhood. His genuine affection for people and natural ability to make others feel welcome had always been among his greatest strengths, qualities that served him well in both personal relationships and business development. Watching him interact with guests from both families, I could see how he might successfully bridge the gap between our different social and business environments. Ashley herself demonstrated remarkable social skills, remembering names and personal details with impressive accuracy while maintaining the gracious demeanor expected of someone in her position. Her ability to make meaningful connections with guests from vastly different backgrounds suggested that she understood the importance of building relationships that transcended immediate family or business interests. The investment she made in these conversations would likely pay dividends for years to come. My father's interactions with Martinez family members revealed his genuine respect for their accomplishments while also exposing his eagerness to be accepted into their more elevated social circle. His conversations with William Martinez focused heavily on potential business collaborations and shared challenges in the construction and development industries. While these discussions were productive and professionally valuable, they also highlighted my father's underlying insecurity about our family's relative position within the broader social hierarchy. The household staff situation became more complex as we transitioned from ceremony to reception. Rosa and Carmen had changed from their ceremony attire into service uniforms, preparing to work during the cocktail hour and dinner service. The transformation was jarring, highlighting the artificial nature of social boundaries that could shift so dramatically based on context and expectations. James Wilson had also transitioned to his security role, monitoring the perimeter while maintaining discreet oversight of the evening's proceedings. Frank Rodriguez and his wife Maria brought their own perspective to the family dynamics, having worked closely with my father for over 2 decades while maintaining their independence and cultural identity. Their presence provided important continuity and authenticity to the celebration, reminding everyone of the immigrant success story that had made the day's luxury possible. Frank's genuine enthusiasm for Danny's happiness and his obvious respect for Ashley created a warmth that balanced some of the more calculated networking occurring throughout the gathering. The extended Chen family, including various cousins, aunts, and uncles, represented different approaches to assimilation and success within American society. Some had pursued traditional professional careers in medicine, law, and engineering, while others had followed entrepreneurial paths similar to my father's. Their diverse experiences and perspectives enriched the family narrative, while also creating subtle competitions about achievement and status that influenced how everyone positioned themselves during social gatherings. Marcus's family had been invited to the wedding despite living across the country, recognizing the importance of including his relatives in our major family celebrations. His parents, both retired teachers, brought a refreshing perspective focused on education, community service, and intellectual curiosity rather than business achievement and social positioning. Their presence reminded me of values that sometimes got overshadowed during high-stakes family events, focused on projecting success and building influence. The elaborate cocktail hour was proceeding exactly as planned when the first hint of trouble emerged during what should have been a routine interaction between my father and Rosa. I was standing near the bar, engaged in conversation with Grace, Kim about recent developments in sustainable investing, when I noticed my father's increasingly agitated gestures as he spoke with our longtime housekeeper. From across the terrace, his body language suggested frustration and impatience. though I couldn't hear the specific words being exchanged. Rosa's expression remained professionally composed, but I could detect the subtle signs of distress that came from years of observing her reactions to various family situations. Her posture had stiffened slightly, and she was responding with the carefully neutral tone she employed when trying to de-escalate conflicts while maintaining her dignity. Whatever my father was discussing with her was clearly causing tension, and other guests were beginning to notice the interaction. Marcus touched my arm gently, drawing my attention to the developing situation. "Everything okay over there?" he asked quietly, his own concern evident as he followed my gaze toward the increasingly uncomfortable exchange. Grace Kim, with her characteristic perceptiveness, had also noticed the tension and was watching with the analytical expression she typically reserved for evaluating complex business situations. I excused myself from our conversation and moved closer to where my father and Rosa were standing, arriving just in time to hear him say, "I specifically told you that the Martinez family expects a certain level of service, and this casual approach isn't going to work for tonight's dinner." His tone carried the kind of condescending authority that he typically reserved for employees who had somehow disappointed him, though Rosa had been managing our family's events flawlessly for 15 years. "Mr. Chen," Rosa replied with careful dignity, "I've prepared everything exactly as Mrs. Chen and I discussed. The service staff knows their roles, and we've coordinated with the club's team to ensure seamless execution throughout the evening." Her professional response should have reassured him, but instead seemed to increase his agitation. "That's exactly the problem," my father continued, his voice rising slightly. "This isn't a family barbecue, Rosa. We have important guests here. Tonight, people who expect sophisticated service from trained professionals, not family friends playing dress-up." The casual cruelty of his words hit me like a physical blow, particularly since several other guests were now within earshot of his disparaging comments. I stepped forward, my voice carefully controlled despite the anger building inside me. "Dad, Rosa has successfully managed events twice this size, including the Chen and Rodriguez anniversary celebration last year that you specifically praised as flawless. My intervention was intended to defuse the situation while defending someone who had served our family with unwavering loyalty and competence." My father's expression hardened as he turned to face me, clearly annoyed by what he perceived as inappropriate interference in his management of household staff. "Emma, this isn't your concern. I'm trying to ensure that tonight's reception meets the standards our guests expect, and that requires making some adjustments to our usual arrangements." "What kind of adjustments?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect that I already knew the answer. The conversation I had overheard between my parents and Ashley's family about maintaining appropriate boundaries was apparently being implemented in ways that would humiliate people who had dedicated years of their lives to serving our family. "Rosa and Carmen will handle behind-the-scenes coordination," my father explained with the tone of someone who considered the matter settled. "The club's professional staff will manage all guest-facing service to ensure consistency with the venue's standards." The euphemistic language couldn't disguise the fundamental disrespect of relegating our most experienced and capable staff to invisible roles because their presence might somehow embarrass us in front of more socially prominent guests. "That makes no sense whatsoever," I replied, my voice carrying more edge than I had intended. "Rosa knows our family's preferences better than anyone, and our guests expect to see familiar faces from our previous events. This change will actually diminish the quality of service, not improve it." Patricia Martinez chose that moment to join our conversation, having noticed the developing tension from her position across the terrace. "Is everything all right here?" she asked with the diplomatic smoothness of someone accustomed to managing potentially awkward social situations. Her timing suggested that she had been monitoring the interaction and was prepared to intervene if necessary. "Just finalizing some service arrangements for dinner," my father replied, his professional facade immediately restored in the presence of Ashley's mother. We want to ensure that everything meets the club's exacting standards. His ability to shift between confrontational and accommodating tones depending on his audience was a skill I had observed throughout my childhood, though I had never before been on the receiving end of such calculated dismissal. "Oh, how thoughtful," Patricia responded, though her expression suggested that she had overheard enough of the previous conversation to understand the underlying dynamics. "I've always found that the most successful events combine professional service with personal touches that reflect the host family's character." Her diplomatic response managed to acknowledge my father's concerns while subtly supporting the value of personal relationships in creating memorable celebrations. My father clearly interpreted her comments as validation of his approach, missing the subtle criticism embedded in her carefully chosen words. "Exactly right," he agreed enthusiastically. "We want tonight to showcase the best of both families' traditions while maintaining the sophistication that our guests deserve." "I think there might be some confusion about what creates sophistication," I interjected, unable to remain silent while Rosa continued to be treated as if she were somehow inadequate after years of exemplary service. "Sophistication comes from genuine hospitality and attention to detail, not from hiding the people who actually ensure that events run smoothly." The tension in my father's jaw became visible as he processed my continued challenge to his authority. "Emma, I think you need to step back and let me handle the operational details. Your emotional attachment to our staff is clouding your judgment about what's appropriate for this level of event." His characterization of my position as emotional attachment, rather than professional assessment, revealed the fundamental disconnect between his perception of my capabilities and my actual role in family financial and operational decisions. More troubling was his apparent belief that treating longtime staff members with dignity was somehow incompatible with hosting sophisticated guests. "My judgment isn't clouded," I replied evenly. "I'm concerned about the message we send when we treat people who have served our family faithfully as somehow inadequate for important occasions. That reflects badly on our character, not theirs." Patricia Martinez was watching this exchange with increasing interest, her expression suggesting that she was learning things about our family dynamics that might influence her assessment of the alliance being formalized through Danny and Ashley's marriage. William Martinez had also drifted closer to our conversation, his attention clearly focused on understanding how our family resolved internal conflicts. "This isn't about character," my father insisted, his frustration becoming more apparent. "It's about understanding appropriate roles and maintaining professional standards. Rosa is wonderful at what she does, but tonight requires a different approach." "What Rosa does?" I replied, my voice carrying the authority I typically reserved for challenging clients who underestimated my expertise, "is manage complex events with flawless execution while making every guest feel personally welcomed and cared for. If you think the club's standard service staff can replicate that level of personalized attention, you don't understand what actually creates memorable experiences for guests." The conversation was attracting more attention than any of us had intended, with several nearby guests pausing their own discussions to observe what was clearly becoming a significant family disagreement. Danny appeared at my shoulder, his expression concerned as he attempted to assess the situation and determine whether his intervention might be helpful or harmful. "What's going on?" he asked quietly, directing his question to me rather than our father, which suggested that he understood the basic dynamics, even if he didn't know the specific details of our disagreement. "Dad wants to hide Rosa and Carmen during dinner service," I explained succinctly, "because he's worried that having them visible might somehow embarrass us in front of the Martinez family and their guests." Danny's expression shifted to confusion as he processed this information. "But Rosa always manages our events. She knows exactly how we like things done, and all our friends expect to see her. Why would we change that for my wedding?" Our father's jaw tightened further as he realized that Danny wasn't automatically supporting his position. "Because tonight isn't about what we've always done," he explained with barely controlled patience. It's about demonstrating that our family can operate at the level expected by our new extended family and their social circle. I don't understand, Danny replied, his confusion genuine. Ashley loves Rosa. She's been looking forward to having her coordinate the service because Rosa knows all the family stories and can make sure everything feels personal and warm. This revelation clearly surprised our father, who had apparently made assumptions about Ashley's preferences without actually consulting her. His planning had been based on his own insecurities about social standing rather than the actual desires of the couple being celebrated or their guests. Ashley herself chose that moment to join our growing circle, having noticed that her parents and new in-laws were engaged in what appeared to be a serious discussion. This observation clearly disturbed Danny, who had always maintained a more optimistic view of our father's character and motivations. His role as the favored son had protected him from experiencing the more controlling and dismissive aspects of our father's personality, allowing him to maintain illusions about family harmony that my position as the challenging daughter had made impossible for me to sustain. "What do you mean by consequences?" Marcus asked, his question reflecting both curiosity and concern about the direction our family dynamics were heading. As someone who had married into the Chen family, he had observed our patterns from an outside perspective that sometimes provided clearer insights than those available to family members caught up in long-standing dynamics. "I mean that Dad has forgotten that respect is earned, not commanded," I replied, watching as my father worked the crowd with renewed energy, apparently believing that the service staff situation had been resolved to everyone's satisfaction. He's acting like his authority is absolute and unchallengeable, which suggests he's forgotten some important realities about how our family actually functions. Grace Kim's expression sharpened with interest, her business instincts clearly recognizing implications that went beyond family interpersonal dynamics. When family leaders start believing they're irreplaceable, they often make strategic errors that create vulnerabilities, she observed. The most successful family enterprises maintain checks and balances that prevent any single individual from accumulating too much unchallenged authority. Her comment hit closer to home than she probably realized, touching on structural issues within our family's financial and business arrangements that could become relevant if conflicts continued to escalate. My father's assumption of absolute authority was indeed based on incomplete understanding of where actual power resided within our family system. Ashley approached our small group, her expression reflecting both social grace and genuine concern about the tensions she had witnessed. "I hope I didn't make things more complicated by expressing my preferences about service arrangements," she said diplomatically. "I really didn't realize there had been disagreement about Rosa's role." "You handled that perfectly," I assured her, genuinely appreciating her instinctive support for maintaining dignity and respect in our family relationships. "Your preferences aligned with what makes sense operationally and personally. The complications came from assumptions that weren't based on actual consultation with anyone involved. My family has learned that the most successful events are those where everyone feels valued and respected," Ashley continued, her comment revealing sophisticated understanding of the relationship dynamics that created either positive or negative energy during important celebrations. When people feel diminished or disrespected, it affects the entire atmosphere, regardless of how elegant the surface arrangements might be. Her perspective provided additional validation for my position, while also demonstrating that the Martinez family's social sophistication was based on genuine understanding of human dynamics rather than superficial concerns about appearances. This insight made my father's assumptions about their expectations even more misguided and potentially damaging. Patricia Martinez had been observing our conversation from a discreet distance, her attention suggesting that she understood the significance of how our family resolved internal conflicts. As someone experienced in managing complex social and business relationships, she likely recognized that family dynamics during stressful situations revealed character and values that would influence long-term partnerships and alliances. The cocktail hour was beginning to wind down as guests prepared to transition into the country club's grand ballroom for dinner and dancing. The elaborate floral arrangements and lighting design created an atmosphere of sophisticated elegance that matched the social ambitions both families had invested in the celebration. Professional photographers continued documenting every aspect of the evening, ensuring that the visual record would reflect the success and harmony that both families wanted to project. Frank Rodriguez approached me as we began moving toward the ballroom, his expression reflecting both friendship and business concerns about the family tensions he had witnessed. "Emma, I hope you know that your father's been under a lot of pressure lately with some of the larger projects we're bidding on," he said quietly. "I think the stress might be affecting his judgment about things that aren't directly related to business." His attempt to provide context for my father's behavior was well-intentioned, but it also revealed that Frank had noticed changes in my father's decision-making and interpersonal style that extended beyond family situations. If business partners were observing concerning patterns, the implications could extend well beyond household staff management and family celebration protocols. "I appreciate your perspective, Frank," I replied carefully. "But stress doesn't excuse treating people disrespectfully, especially people who have served our family faithfully for years. If anything, stress should remind us how much we depend on reliable, competent people like Rosa." Frank nodded thoughtfully, his expression suggesting that he understood the broader principles at stake even if he felt loyalty to my father as a business partner and longtime friend. "You're absolutely right about that," he acknowledged. "Sometimes success can make people forget what really matters, and they need reminders from family members who keep them grounded." The transition into the ballroom provided a natural opportunity for the various family factions to reposition themselves and attempt to restore the celebratory atmosphere that had been somewhat disrupted by the earlier tensions. The dinner seating arrangements had been carefully planned to facilitate positive interactions between the two families while ensuring that potentially problematic combinations were avoided. I found myself seated at a table with Grace Kim, Marcus, several of Danny's friends from college, and Jennifer Walsh, Ashley's maid of honor. The combination was deliberately designed to create engaging conversation while avoiding the family political dynamics that might complicate the dining experience. However, the strategic seating also meant that I would have limited opportunities to observe and influence my father's interactions throughout the dinner service. Rosa moved through the ballroom with her characteristic grace and efficiency, coordinating with the club's professional staff to ensure seamless service while maintaining the personal touches that made our family events distinctive. Her professionalism was evident to anyone paying attention, validating my earlier arguments about her capabilities while highlighting the arbitrary nature of my father's concerns about her suitability for sophisticated events. The evening's program included speeches from both fathers, a tradition that would provide my father with an opportunity to address the assembled guests and potentially set a tone that could either reinforce the earlier tensions or demonstrate his ability to rise above personal conflicts in service of his son's happiness. The grand ballroom of the Riverside Country Club had been transformed into something that resembled a fairy tale setting, with cascading white roses, golden lighting, and crystal chandeliers that cast dancing shadows across the polished marble floor. 300 guests filled the elegantly appointed round tables, each centerpiece a masterpiece of floral artistry that had cost more than most people earned in a month. The orchestra played softly in the background as the final courses were served, and anticipation built for the evening's speeches that would formally welcome Ashley into the Chen family and celebrate the union of two successful immigrant dynasties. My father had spent the dinner course working the room with renewed vigor, moving from table to table with the practiced charm of someone who understood that weddings provided unparalleled networking opportunities. His conversations with the Martinez family's influential guests had been particularly animated, as he recognized that tonight's celebration represented far more than his son's marriage. It was his introduction to a social and business circle that could dramatically expand Chen and Rodriguez's opportunities and elevate our family's position within Northern California's competitive construction and development industries. William Martinez had been gracious in his responses to my father's overtures, though his experienced eye had undoubtedly noted the calculated nature of many interactions throughout the evening. As someone who had built his own empire through strategic relationship building, he understood exactly what my father was attempting to accomplish and seemed willing to explore potential collaborations that could benefit both families' business interests. However, his subtle reactions suggested that he was also evaluating our family's character and values as potential long-term partners. The tension from the earlier disagreement about Rosa's role had largely dissipated during dinner, helped by her flawless execution of service coordination and the obvious satisfaction of guests who appreciated the personal attention that distinguished our family events from more institutional celebrations. My father had even made a point of publicly thanking Rosa during one of his table visits, though his comments carried an undertone of paternalistic authority that reminded everyone present of the hierarchical relationship between employer and employee. As dessert was being served and the evening transitioned toward the formal speech portion of the program, I noticed my father conferring quietly with the band leader and event coordinator, apparently finalizing details for his presentation. His body language projected confidence and satisfaction, suggesting that he believed the evening had unfolded exactly according to his vision, and that his upcoming remarks would cement the favorable impressions he had been working to create throughout the celebration. Danny and Ashley sat at the head table, glowing with happiness and seemingly oblivious to the undercurrents of family politics and business calculation that had shaped much of the evening's interactions. Their genuine affection for each other provided a refreshing counterpoint to the more strategic elements of the celebration, reminding everyone present that romantic love and personal commitment remained at the center of what was being celebrated, regardless of the broader implications for family alliances and business opportunities. The Master of Ceremonies, a professional hired specifically for his experience with high-end wedding celebrations, began the formal portion of the evening. By thanking guests for their attendance and acknowledging the significance of the union being celebrated, his polished delivery and sophisticated humor helped create an atmosphere of celebration and anticipation for the speeches that would follow, starting with remarks from both fathers as representatives of their respective families. My father rose from his seat at the head table with obvious pleasure, his expression radiating the confidence of someone who believed he had successfully navigated a complex social and business challenge while positioning his family for future success. The earlier disagreement about household staff seemed completely forgotten as he prepared to address the assembled guests, many of whom represented exactly the kind of influential contacts he had been hoping to cultivate through Danny's marriage. To Ashley. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily through the ballroom's excellent acoustics. "Tonight, we celebrate not just the marriage of two wonderful young people, but the joining of two families who share fundamental values about hard work, success, and the importance of building something meaningful for future generations." His opening struck exactly the right note of celebration and vision, acknowledging both the personal and broader significance of the occasion. He continued with reflections on his own immigrant experience and the sacrifices that had enabled him to build Chen and Rodriguez into a successful enterprise, themes that resonated deeply with many guests who had their own stories of overcoming challenges to achieve success in America. His ability to connect personal narrative with broader themes of achievement and opportunity demonstrated the communication skills that had served him well in business development and community leadership roles throughout his career. "Danny has grown into exactly the kind of man I hoped he would become," my father continued, his voice carrying genuine pride and affection for his son. "He understands the value of hard work, the importance of family loyalty, and the responsibility that comes with success. Ashley, we welcome you not just as Danny's wife, but as a full member of the Chen family, with all the privileges and responsibilities that entails." The warmth and sincerity of his comments about Danny and Ashley created a positive atmosphere that seemed to validate the evening's celebration and reinforce the family unity that both the Chen and Martinez families wanted to project. His ability to shift from the earlier tensions to heartfelt family sentiment demonstrated the emotional intelligence that had contributed to his business success and community standing. However, as his speech continued, subtle changes in tone and content began to reveal the controlling attitudes that had sparked our earlier disagreement. Family loyalty means understanding roles and responsibilities, he continued, his gaze moving deliberately around the room to make eye contact with various family members. It means supporting family decisions even when they might challenge our personal preferences or emotions. The specific phrasing of his comments felt directed at me, though delivered in language general enough that most guests would interpret them as conventional wisdom about marriage and family harmony. His ability to embed personal messages within public remarks demonstrated sophisticated understanding of how to use social occasions to reinforce his authority while maintaining plausible deniability about any confrontational intent. Success requires making difficult decisions and maintaining standards that reflect our family's values and aspirations, my father continued, his voice gaining strength as he moved toward what appeared to be the central theme of his remarks. Sometimes those decisions might seem harsh to people who don't understand the bigger picture. But leadership means having the courage to do what's necessary for the family's long-term benefit. Grace Kim, seated beside me, had been listening with the analytical attention she typically brought to business presentations, and I could see her expression growing more concerned as she recognized the implications of my father's increasingly pointed comments. Her experience with family business dynamics had taught her to recognize when public statements were being used to address private conflicts, and my father's speech was clearly crossing that line. We live in a time when traditional authority is constantly questioned, when people believe their individual preferences should override family decisions and established hierarchy, my father continued, his comments now clearly directed at broader, social and political themes that went far beyond celebrating Danny and Ashley's marriage. But strong families require clear leadership and the wisdom to distinguish between what feels good and what actually serves our collective interests. The ballroom had grown noticeably quieter as guests began to recognize that they were witnessing something more complex than conventional wedding remarks. Patricia and William Martinez exchanged subtle glances that suggested they were processing the implications of what they were hearing, while family members who had witnessed the earlier staff conflict began to understand that those tensions were apparently not resolved despite my father's surface concessions. Marcus reached over to squeeze my hand reassuringly, his touch providing both emotional support and a reminder that whatever my father was attempting to accomplish with his increasingly pointed remarks, I wasn't facing the situation alone. His presence had been invaluable throughout the evening, providing perspective and stability when family dynamics threatened to overwhelm my ability to respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her concern evident as she looked between the various family members whose body language suggested significant tension. "We're just discussing service arrangements for dinner," Patricia Martinez explained diplomatically, though her tone suggested that she understood the conversation involved much more than operational details. "Oh, I hope Rosa will be coordinating everything," Ashley said immediately. "She's been so wonderful throughout the planning process, and I specifically requested that she handle the family service because she understands all the special touches that make events feel personal rather than institutional." The silence that followed Ashley's comments was profound, as my father processed the realization that his supposedly sophisticated approach to service management was actually contrary to the bride's specific wishes. His attempt to impress the Martinez family by minimizing Rosa's role had been based on incorrect assumptions about their expectations and preferences. William Martinez spoke for the first time since joining our conversation, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to resolving complex situations diplomatically. "It sounds like there might have been some miscommunication about expectations." In our experience, the most successful events are those where the host family's trusted staff work seamlessly with venue professionals to create something that feels both polished and authentic. His intervention provided my father with a graceful way to reverse his position without losing face completely, though the damage to Rose's dignity and my respect for his judgment had already been done. More significantly, the public nature of the disagreement had revealed family dynamics that should have remained private, potentially affecting how the Martinez family viewed our suitability as long-term partners and allies. "Of course," my father replied, his professional composure restored, but his underlying frustration still visible to anyone who knew him well. "I was simply ensuring that all possibilities had been considered. If Ashley prefers Rosa's personal touch, then that's exactly what we'll provide." Rosa, who had maintained her professional dignity throughout the entire uncomfortable exchange, simply nodded and said, "I'll coordinate with the club staff to ensure seamless service throughout the evening, just as we planned originally." Her gracious response highlighted the contrast between her professionalism and my father's petty concerns about social positioning. As the group began to disperse, I caught my father's arm, indicating that our conversation wasn't finished. The public disagreement had been resolved, but the underlying issues about respect, authority, and family values required further discussion. His expression, as he turned to face me, suggested that he understood exactly what I wanted to discuss and was prepared for continued conflict. The aftermath of the public disagreement about Rosa's role created an undercurrent of tension that spread through the cocktail hour like ripples in a pond. While most guests remained focused on their own conversations and networking opportunities, the family members and close friends who had witnessed the exchange were clearly processing its implications for broader family dynamics and the success of the evening's celebration. Grace Kim approached me during a brief moment when I had stepped away from the main crowd, her expression reflecting both concern and professional curiosity about what she had observed. "That was an interesting display of family decision-making," she commented quietly, her tone carefully neutral, but her meaning clear. As someone who had built her own business while navigating complex family expectations, she understood exactly what had just unfolded and its potential consequences. "My father seems to believe that success requires abandoning the people who helped create it," I replied, accepting the fresh champagne flute she offered while trying to regain my composure. The public nature of our disagreement had been unfortunate, but I couldn't regret defending Rosa's dignity and competence in front of people who needed to understand our family's actual values. "In my experience," Grace observed, "the families who maintain their success over multiple generations are those who remember where they came from and honor the relationships that supported their growth. Families who start believing their own publicity and abandoning their foundations tend to face more significant problems down the road." Her perspective provided valuable context for understanding the broader implications of my father's recent behavior. His increasing focus on social positioning and external validation was creating internal tensions that could undermine the very relationships and values that had enabled our family's success in the first place. Marcus rejoined our conversation, having spent the intervening time smoothing over reactions from other family members who had witnessed the uncomfortable exchange. "Your cousin Janet wants to know if she should say something to your father about how he handled that situation," he reported quietly. "She's pretty upset about the way Rosa was treated, especially in front of the Martinez family." The fact that extended family members were considering intervening suggested that my father's behavior had crossed lines that went beyond normal family disagreements. Janet had always been particularly close to Rosa, having relied on her support during several family crises over the years. Her willingness to confront my father directly indicated how seriously she viewed his disrespectful treatment of someone who had served our family so faithfully. "Let me handle it," I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure how to proceed. The public nature of our disagreement had complicated what should have been a private family matter, creating ripple effects that could influence the success of Danny and Ashley's celebration, as well as longer-term family relationships. Danny appeared beside us, his expression troubled as he processed the implications of what had occurred. "I don't understand what's gotten into Dad lately," he confided, his voice reflecting genuine confusion about our father's recent behavior. "He's been making comments about family loyalty and appropriate roles that don't sound like him at all." "They sound exactly like him," I corrected gently, "just more openly than usual. The difference is that he's no longer concerned about hiding these attitudes because he thinks his position is secure enough that he doesn't need to worry about consequences." "Emma," my father said, his gaze turning directly toward me with unmistakable intent, "has always been strong-willed and independent, qualities that served her well in building her own business success. But sometimes those same qualities can create challenges when family unity requires accepting decisions that might conflict with personal opinions or emotional attachments." The direct mention of my name in the context of his broader comments about authority and family loyalty sent a ripple of discomfort through the ballroom, as guests realized they were witnessing a father using his son's wedding celebration to publicly address conflicts with his daughter. The inappropriateness of the moment was evident to anyone with basic social sensitivity, though my father seemed oblivious to the negative reactions his comments were generating. "Family means understanding that individual success is meaningless if it comes at the expense of collective harmony and shared values," he continued, his voice carrying an edge of authority that suggested he expected his remarks to settle any outstanding disagreements through the force of public declaration. "It means recognizing that some people, regardless of their professional accomplishments, might not fully understand what's required to maintain family unity and social standing." Jennifer Walsh, Ashley's maid of honor, was watching the proceedings. With obvious discomfort, her expression reflecting both social embarrassment and genuine concern about the family dynamics being revealed during what should have been a celebration. Her background in New York's competitive financial industry had exposed her to various forms of workplace and social conflict, but she seemed unprepared for witnessing such direct family confrontation in such a public setting. Danny's expression had shifted from happiness to confusion and growing alarm, as he began to understand that his father was using his wedding celebration to publicly challenge and diminish his sister. Ashley's face reflected similar discomfort, though her position as the new family member being welcomed created obvious constraints on how she could respond to conflicts between established family members. The Martinez family has shown us what's possible when family members understand their roles and work together toward common goals, rather than allowing personal preferences to undermine collective success, my father continued, his comparison clearly intended to highlight what he viewed as my failure to conform to appropriate family member behavior. That's the kind of unity and shared purpose that creates lasting success across generations. William Martinez's expression had grown increasingly uncomfortable as he realized that his family was being used as a weapon in what was clearly a personal conflict between my father and me. His diplomatic skills were being tested by the challenge of maintaining social grace while distancing his family from involvement in disputes that had nothing to do with celebrating his daughter's marriage. The contrast between my father's earlier graciousness and his current confrontational approach was striking enough that even guests who didn't understand the specific family dynamics could recognize that something inappropriate was occurring. Professional wedding photographers continued documenting the speech, though their expressions suggested they were uncomfortable capturing what was clearly becoming a public family confrontation rather than a celebratory father's remarks. "Tonight represents a new chapter for the Chen family," my father concluded, his voice carrying finality that suggested he believed his public statements had successfully established his authority and resolved any outstanding challenges to his leadership. "A chapter where family loyalty and appropriate respect for established hierarchy will guide our decisions and ensure continued success for generations to come." The applause that followed his remarks was polite but notably restrained, with many guests clearly uncomfortable about what they had witnessed while uncertain about how to respond appropriately. The social awkwardness was palpable as people processed the implications of a father using his son's wedding celebration to publicly confront his daughter about family authority and loyalty. Frank Rodriguez looked genuinely distressed by what he had witnessed, his longtime friendship with my father, apparently making it difficult for him to reconcile the person he knew with the public behavior he had just observed. His wife Maria's expression reflected similar discomfort, though her closer relationship with our family's domestic arrangements meant she understood exactly what issues were being addressed through my father's pointed remarks. As my father returned to his seat with obvious satisfaction, believing he had successfully used the public platform to reinforce his position and discourage further challenges to his authority, I felt the same crystalline clarity that had guided my most successful business decisions. The man who had just attempted to publicly humiliate and diminish me had also inadvertently provided the perfect justification for demonstrating exactly how much power he had assumed I would never be willing to use. The evening's celebration was about to take a dramatically different direction than anyone in the ballroom could possibly have anticipated. My father's assumption that public confrontation would result in my submission had been based on fundamental misunderstandings about both my character and my capabilities. He was about to receive a very expensive education about the difference between the appearance of authority and its underlying reality. William Martinez was scheduled to speak next, followed by traditional toasts from the wedding party, but I had already decided that the evening's program would be significantly modified from its planned schedule. My father had chosen to make our family's internal dynamics a matter of public discussion and evaluation. I was prepared to ensure that discussion continued until everyone present understood exactly how power actually functioned within the Chen family structure. The silence that followed my father's inflammatory speech stretched uncomfortably through the ballroom as guests struggled to process what they had witnessed and determine appropriate responses to such an unprecedented breach of wedding celebration protocol. The professional master of ceremonies looked uncertain about how to transition from what had clearly been a personal attack disguised as paternal wisdom to the continuation of evening festivities, while family members exchanged worried glances that reflected their own discomfort with the confrontational turn the celebration had taken. I rose from my seat with deliberate calm, my movement immediately drawing the attention of everyone in the ballroom as they wondered whether I would attempt to respond to my father's public challenge or simply allow his remarks to stand without rebuttal. The decision to address his comments directly, rather than ignoring them or handling the conflict privately, would violate traditional expectations about family harmony and appropriate wedding celebration behavior. But my father had already shattered those conventions with his own unprecedented use of the platform. "Thank you, Dad, for those heartfelt remarks about family loyalty and understanding roles," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly attentive ballroom as I moved toward the microphone with the confident bearing I had developed through years of presenting to demanding clients and skeptical investors. I think this is an excellent opportunity to discuss exactly what family loyalty means and how roles and responsibilities are actually distributed within our family structure. The immediate tension in the room was palpable as guests realized they were about to witness the continuation of a family conflict that had already exceeded acceptable boundaries for public discussion. Marcus's expression reflected both support for my decision to respond and concern about the potential consequences of escalating a confrontation that could permanently damage family relationships and social standing. For those of you who might not be familiar with my professional background beyond my role as Danny's sister, I continued, establishing context that would be crucial for understanding the revelations to follow. I'm the founder and managing partner of Pacific Wealth Management, where I've spent the past 5 years helping high-net-worth families optimize their financial strategies and protect their assets across multiple generations. Grace Kim's slight smile indicated that she understood exactly where my presentation was heading and approved of the strategic approach I was taking to address my father's public challenge. Her experience with family business dynamics had taught Her that sometimes direct confrontation became necessary when authority figures overreached their actual power base and needed correction before causing lasting damage to family enterprises. Those professional skills have been particularly valuable in managing our own family's financial portfolio, I continued, allowing the implications of my statement to register with guests who were beginning to understand that the family dynamics they had been witnessing might be more complex than they had initially realized. Over the past 5 years, I've had responsibility for optimizing the Chen family's investment strategies, managing our various business accounts, and ensuring that our financial resources support both current operations and long-term wealth preservation. My father's expression had shifted from satisfaction to confusion as he began to process the direction of my remarks and consider their potential implications for his own position and authority. His assumption that I would either remain silent or offer a defensive response had been based on incomplete understanding of both my personality and my strategic capabilities when challenged directly. Dad mentioned the importance of understanding roles and responsibilities within family structures. I continued, my tone remaining conversational despite the increasingly charged atmosphere in the ballroom. I completely agree with that principle, which is why I think it might be helpful for everyone to understand exactly how responsibilities are currently distributed within our family's financial and business operations. Patricia Martinez was watching with obvious fascination, her experience with high-stakes business negotiations allowing her to recognize sophisticated strategic maneuvering when she witnessed it. Her expression suggested that she was reassessing her understanding of the Chen family power dynamics and recognizing that the evening's earlier conflicts might have been more significant than she had initially realized. 5 years ago, during what Dad might remember as a particularly challenging period for Chen and Rodriguez, I continued, referencing the financial crisis that had nearly destroyed the family business without explicitly mentioning the circumstances that had led to my expanded responsibilities. I was asked to take on additional responsibilities for managing our family's financial affairs while the company navigated some complex market conditions. Frank Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly remembering the near collapse of their business partnership and the financial restructuring that had saved both companies from bankruptcy. His expression suggested that he was beginning to understand the implications of my remarks for the current family power structure, and possibly regretting his earlier attempts to provide context for my father's confrontational behavior. Those additional responsibilities included comprehensive power of attorney for all Chen family financial accounts, business credit lines, investment portfolios, and corporate decision-making authority for any transactions exceeding specified thresholds, I explained, my voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone I typically used when explaining complex financial structures to clients who needed to understand exactly how their wealth was managed and protected. The ballroom had grown completely silent as guests processed the implications of what I was revealing, while my father's face began to drain of color as he started to comprehend the potential consequences of having publicly challenged someone who apparently controlled far more of the family's financial infrastructure than he had remembered or considered. These arrangements were established through comprehensive legal documentation that remains in effect today, I continued, pulling my phone from my small evening purse and opening the banking applications that provided real-time access to family accounts and business credit lines. They were designed to ensure continuity of operations and financial security, regardless of any disruptions to normal business operations or family circumstances. Danny's expression reflected growing alarm as he began to understand that his father's public confrontation with his sister might have implications that extended far beyond family interpersonal dynamics to affect the actual operations and financial stability of their family business and personal wealth. Ashley's face showed similar concern, though her position as the newest family member made it difficult for her to fully grasp the significance of what was being revealed. Dad's comments about family loyalty and understanding appropriate roles are particularly interesting, I continued, my tone remaining calm while delivering information that was systematically dismantling his assumptions about family authority and control. because they suggest that he might have forgotten exactly how our family's financial security and business operations are actually structured and maintained. The professional photographers had stopped documenting the speeches, apparently recognizing that they were witnessing something that transcended normal wedding celebration coverage and entered territory that the families involved might not want. Permanently recorded. Their discretion demonstrated the kind of professional judgment that distinguished experienced event documentation from amateur coverage. For example, I continued, accessing specific account information on my phone while maintaining eye contact with my father. The business credit lines that funded tonight's celebration, including the venue deposits, catering costs, and entertainment. Expenses all flow through accounts that require my authorization for transactions exceeding $10,000. The mathematical precision of my revelation hit the ballroom like a physical force, as guests realized that the elegant celebration they were attending had been funded through financial resources controlled by the daughter who had just been publicly criticized for insufficient family loyalty and appropriate respect for established hierarchy. Similarly, I continued, my voice gaining confidence as I recognized the complete attention of the audience and my father's growing comprehension of his strategic error. The payroll systems for Chen and Rodriguez employees, the insurance policies that protect our business operations, and the investment accounts that provide the passive income supporting our family's lifestyle all operate through structures that require my ongoing oversight and approval. William Martinez's expression had shifted to something approaching professional admiration, as his business experience allowed him to recognize sophisticated financial planning and strategic thinking when he encountered it. His assessment of the Chen family's competence and long-term viability was clearly being revised upward based on the evidence of careful financial management and succession planning that my revelations had exposed. The point of explaining these arrangements, I continued, addressing my comments directly to my father while ensuring that everyone present understood the implications of what was being discussed, is not to diminish anyone's contributions or challenge anyone's leadership in areas where they have expertise and authority. It's simply to clarify how responsibilities are actually distributed, so that discussions about family loyalty and appropriate roles can be based on accurate information, rather than assumptions. Grace Kim was barely suppressing a smile, clearly appreciating both the strategic brilliance of my response and the educational value of watching someone learn the consequences of making assumptions about other people's capabilities and power. Positions. Her own experience with family business dynamics had taught her that such lessons, while painful, were sometimes necessary to establish healthy long-term relationships. Chen and Rodriguez remains a successful company because it has strong operational leadership and experienced project management, I acknowledged, offering my father a graceful way to maintain dignity while accepting the new reality being established through my revelations. But that operational success depends on financial infrastructure and strategic planning that requires different expertise and different responsibilities. My father's jaw worked silently as he processed the full implications of his position, recognizing that his public challenge had inadvertently revealed his own ignorance about fundamental aspects of the family's financial structure, and his dependence on systems he didn't control or fully understand. The power dynamics he had assumed were settled in his favor had just been revealed as far more complex and potentially precarious than he had realized. Moving forward, I continued, establishing the framework for how family relationships would function given the clarified understanding of actual responsibilities and authority. I'm confident that we can maintain the family unity and shared purpose that Dad mentioned in his remarks. But that unity will need to be based on mutual respect and accurate understanding of how our family actually functions, rather than outdated assumptions about traditional hierarchy. The silence that followed my remarks was profound, broken only by the soft background music that the orchestra had continued playing despite the dramatic turn the evening's entertainment had taken. Guests sat frozen in their seats, processing the implications of what they had witnessed while trying to determine appropriate responses to such an unprecedented display of family financial revelation and power realignment. Jennifer Walsh looked simultaneously fascinated and horrified, her New York financial industry background providing context for understanding the sophistication of what she had witnessed while her social sensibilities recoiled from the public nature of the family confrontation. Ashley's expression reflected similar complexity, as she struggled to reconcile her new in-laws' apparent prosperity and success with the dramatic power struggles being played out during her wedding celebration. Danny finally found his voice, though his words reflected confusion rather than any attempt to mediate between his father and sister. "Emma, I had no idea about most of what you just explained," he said quietly, his comment carrying implications for his own understanding of family dynamics and his potential role in future business operations. "There was no reason for you to know the details," I replied gently, recognizing that my brother's position as heir apparent had shielded him from understanding the complex financial infrastructure that actually supported the family's success and lifestyle. These arrangements were designed to operate seamlessly in the background so that everyone could focus on their areas of expertise without worrying about operational details. My father's face had progressed from confusion through alarm to something approaching devastation as he fully grasped the implications of what had been revealed and the complete reversal of the power dynamic he had attempted to establish through his confrontational speech. The evening he had planned as a demonstration of his authority and social standing had become an expensive lesson about the difference between assumed control and actual power. The silence stretching through the ballroom following my financial revelations felt dense with collective shock as 300 guests processed the implications of what they had just witnessed while struggling to determine appropriate responses to such an unprecedented family confrontation during what should have been a joyful celebration. The elegant wedding reception had transformed into something resembling a corporate boardroom presentation, complete with financial disclosures that had fundamentally altered everyone's understanding of the Chen family's power structure and interpersonal dynamics. My father remained frozen at his seat, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief, anger, and growing comprehension as he struggled to reconcile his long-held assumptions about family authority with the reality that had just been systematically dismantled before an audience of his most important business associates and social contacts. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass, the physical manifestation of stress visible to anyone paying close attention to his reactions. Frank Rodriguez looked as though he had been struck by lightning, his 25-year business partnership with my father suddenly revealed as far more dependent on financial infrastructure he didn't control or fully understand than he had ever realized. His wife Maria was staring at me with something approaching awe, clearly recognizing that the quiet daughter who had always remained in the background during family celebrations possessed capabilities and authority that had been completely invisible to most family observers. Grace Kim's expression reflected professional satisfaction with the strategic brilliance of my response, though I could also detect concern about the potential long-term consequences of such a dramatic public revelation. Her experience with family, business dynamics had taught her that while direct confrontation sometimes became necessary, it inevitably created new challenges that required careful management to prevent lasting damage to relationships and business operations. Patricia Martinez was watching the proceedings with the analytical attention of someone who understood that she was witnessing a defining moment in a family's evolution, one that would have significant implications for the business alliance being formalized through Danny and Ashley's marriage. Her assessment of the Chen family's competence and long-term viability was clearly being revised based on evidence of sophisticated financial planning and strategic thinking that my revelations had exposed. William Martinez had leaned back in his chair with an expression that suggested he was reassessing everything he thought he knew about the family his daughter had married into, while simultaneously recognizing the business acumen and strategic capabilities that my presentation had demonstrated. His experience with complex corporate transactions had given him appreciation for the kind of financial infrastructure and succession planning that my remarks had revealed. Danny and Ashley sat at the head table looking stricken, their wedding celebration having devolved into a public family power struggle that threatened to overshadow their romantic union and create lasting tensions within the newly merged family structure. Danny's confusion was evident as he struggled to understand how his father's authority, which had seemed absolute throughout his childhood, had just been revealed as largely illusory. Marcus maintained his supportive presence beside me, though his expression reflected concern about the potential consequences of such a dramatic escalation of family conflict. His background in technology had taught him to appreciate systematic approaches to complex problems, and he could recognize that my response had been strategically sound, even if the public nature of the confrontation created obvious risks for family relationships. The professional staff managing the evening's service had stopped their activities, uncertain whether to continue with planned program elements or wait for family direction about how to proceed. The master of ceremonies looked particularly lost, his experience with high-end wedding celebrations having failed to prepare him for managing family financial disclosures and power realignment during what should have been celebratory speeches. Tyler Brooks, Danny's best friend and groomsman, was staring at the head table with obvious concern about his friend's emotional state and the implications of the family conflict for Danny and Ashley's future happiness. His longtime friendship with our family had given him front-row seats to various family dynamics over the years, but nothing had prepared him for witnessing such a dramatic revelation of hidden power structures. Several Chen and Rodriguez employees were exchanging worried glances, clearly processing the implications of learning that their company's financial stability depended on infrastructure controlled by someone other than the man they had always assumed held ultimate authority. Their job security and career prospects were suddenly revealed as more complex and potentially precarious than they had previously understood. Extended family members who had witnessed both the earlier staff conflict and now this dramatic financial revelation were struggling to reconcile their long-held understanding of family hierarchy with evidence that power was distributed very differently than traditional appearances had suggested. Cousin Janet looked simultaneously vindicated and alarmed, recognizing that her earlier concerns about my father's treatment of Rosa had been symptomatic of larger problems with his judgment and authority. The photography team had completely ceased documentation, apparently recognizing that the evening had moved beyond normal wedding celebration coverage into territory that families would likely prefer not to have permanently recorded. Their professional discretion was appropriate, though the absence of official documentation meant that the evening's dramatic revelations would exist primarily in the memories of the 300 witnesses who had observed the complete transformation of the Chen family's public image. Ashley's extended family, including the congressman and various Silicon Valley executives who had attended to celebrate what they assumed would be a straightforward society wedding, looked uniformly uncomfortable with finding themselves witnesses to such an intimate family confrontation. Their social and professional standings made them particularly sensitive to being associated with family conflicts that could affect their own reputations and business relationships. My father finally found his voice, though his words reflected the desperation of someone who recognized that his position had been fundamentally compromised, but still hoped to salvage some remnant of authority through emotional appeal. "Emma, this is neither the time nor the place for discussing private family financial arrangements," he said, his tone attempting to project parental authority, while his body language revealed his growing panic about the situation's implications. "You're absolutely right," I replied with calm agreement that surprised everyone present, including my father, who had expected continued confrontation rather than apparent concession. "This should have remained a private family matter, which is why your decision to use tonight's celebration as a platform for publicly challenging my judgment and family loyalty was so inappropriate and disappointing." The logical precision of my response highlighted the contradiction in his position, making it clear to everyone present that he had initiated the public confrontation while simultaneously criticizing the public nature of the discussion. His attempt to reassert control through procedural objections was undermined by his own responsibility for creating the circumstances that had led to public disclosure of private family arrangements. "However," I continued, recognizing the opportunity to establish clear boundaries for future family interactions, while the audience's attention remained focused and engaged. Since you chose to make our family's internal dynamics a matter of public discussion and evaluation, I think it's important that everyone understand exactly how those dynamics actually function, rather than operating on incorrect assumptions. Grace Kim nodded slightly in approval of my strategic approach, recognizing that I was using the unfortunate circumstances my father had created to establish a foundation for healthier long-term family relationships based on accurate information, rather than power fantasies and outdated assumptions about traditional authority structures. The financial arrangements I've described weren't secrets or hidden power grabs, I explained, addressing my comments to the broader audience while ensuring that my father understood the implications of what was being clarified. They were carefully planned structures designed to protect our family's interests and ensure business continuity during challenging periods. The only reason they seem surprising is that some family members chose not to pay attention to how our financial security was actually being managed and maintained. Frank Rodriguez was nodding slowly as he processed this explanation, clearly remembering the financial crisis that had nearly destroyed both families' businesses and recognizing that the arrangements I had described made perfect sense from a business continuity and risk management perspective. His engineering background had taught him to appreciate systematic approaches to complex problems, even when their implementation created uncomfortable revelations about traditional authority structures. Moving forward, I continued, establishing the framework for future family interactions, while the shocked audience remained attentive to every word. I hope we can return to focusing on what really matters tonight, which is celebrating Danny and Ashley's happiness and welcoming Ashley into our family with the respect and dignity she deserves. The gracious conclusion of my remarks provided everyone present with an opportunity to redirect their attention toward more appropriate wedding celebration themes while processing the fundamental shift in family dynamics that had just been revealed. However, the implications of what had transpired would clearly require extensive private discussion and relationship rebuilding in the days and weeks following the celebration. Danny finally stood from his position at the head table, his expression reflecting both confusion about what he had witnessed and determination to salvage some remnant of celebratory atmosphere from the evening's dramatic proceedings. "I think," he said quietly, his voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom, "that we should all remember that tonight is supposed to be about love, family, and building something beautiful together." His diplomatic attempt to redirect attention toward more positive themes was appreciated by guests who were eager for any excuse to move beyond the uncomfortable family confrontation they had witnessed. However, the fundamental questions about family power, authority, and financial control that had been raised could not simply be dismissed through appeals to wedding celebration protocol. Ashley rose beside her new husband, her grace under pressure evident as she attempted to provide support while navigating her own complex position as someone who had just witnessed her new in-laws' dramatic power struggle during what should have been the happiest day of her life. "Danny's right," she said simply, her voice reflecting both wisdom and emotional maturity beyond her years. "Tonight is about family, and families sometimes have difficult conversations, but they work through them together." Her diplomatic response provided a bridge between acknowledging what had occurred and moving forward with the evening's celebration. Though everyone present understood that the difficult conversation they had witnessed would require extensive follow-up discussion to resolve the fundamental issues that had been exposed, my father remained seated, his expression reflecting the dawning realization that his attempt to publicly establish dominance had instead revealed his own ignorance about fundamental aspects of the family's financial structure and his dependence on systems he didn't control. The evening he had envisioned as a triumph of his social and business standing had become an expensive lesson about the dangers of making assumptions about other people's capabilities and power positions. Part 9. Private Confrontations. The immediate aftermath of my financial revelations created a complex social challenge for everyone present, as guests struggled to determine appropriate responses to such an unprecedented family confrontation, while the evening's celebration still required completion according to wedding protocol. The master of ceremonies, demonstrating admirable professional recovery, announced that dancing would begin shortly in the adjacent ballroom while family members had an opportunity for private discussion about the evening's developments. The transition provided a natural opportunity for concerned family members and close friends to approach me with questions, support, and expressions of shock about what they had witnessed. Grace Kim was among the first to reach my side, her expression reflecting both professional admiration for my strategic response and personal concern about the potential consequences of such a dramatic public confrontation with my father. That was either brilliant or catastrophic, she observed quietly, her comment capturing the dual nature of what had just transpired. Probably both, depending on how your family processes what just happened and whether your father has enough wisdom to recognize that his position has fundamentally changed. Her assessment was characteristically precise, acknowledging both the strategic necessity of my response and the inevitable complications that would follow from such a dramatic revelation of family power dynamics. The effectiveness of my counterattack would ultimately be measured not by its immediate impact, but by its long-term consequences for family relationships and business operations. Marcus appeared at my other side, his expression reflecting the complex emotions of someone who had supported my decision to respond directly while recognizing the potential costs of such a confrontational approach. "How are you feeling?" he asked quietly, his question focusing on my emotional state rather than the strategic implications of what had occurred. "Oddly calm," I replied, recognizing that the crystalline clarity I had experienced during my presentation persisted even as I began to process the magnitude of what had just transpired. "I've been preparing for this conversation for months, just not in this setting or under these circumstances." Frank Rodriguez approached our small group with obvious reluctance, his longtime loyalty to my father creating obvious conflicts with his growing understanding that I had been correct about both the staff situation and the broader issues about respect and family dynamics. His expression reflected the complex emotions of someone who was being forced to reassess fundamental assumptions about relationships and authority structures that had guided his professional and personal life for decades. "Emma," he began hesitantly, "I hope you know that I never fully understood the extent of your responsibilities for our financial operations. Your father always spoke about business decisions as though they were his exclusive domain, and I assumed that was accurate." His admission revealed the extent to which my father had misrepresented family financial arrangements to his business partner, creating a situation where Frank had been making strategic decisions based on incomplete information about the actual power structure supporting their company's operations. The implications for their partnership and future business planning would require extensive discussion and potential restructuring. "There was no reason for you to know the details," I replied diplomatically, recognizing that Frank's ignorance had been the result of my father's deliberate misrepresentation rather than any failure on his part to understand business relationships. The arrangements were designed to operate seamlessly so that operational leadership could focus on areas of expertise without being distracted by financial management details. Patricia Martinez had been observing our conversation from a respectful distance, clearly interested in understanding the implications of the evening's revelations for the business alliance being formalized through Danny and Ashley's marriage. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.